I'm Wilma Linderman Cassebury. This is my 81st year, and I remember my grandmother, Violet Liona Sanders, all kinds of names, Allenbach. She was born in 1890 and died in 1987, but my memories of her and the things she told me are very vivid. One of her earliest memories is of her father, who was a veterinarian surgeon, but we believe that he was educated in Germany and had some difficulty getting his profession recognized in this country because we have a picture of him in a butcher's costume, and grandmother remembered him being a meat inspector. She remembered his death, and she remembered that at one time they owned land in Michigan, and she thought that they had paid $1.50 an acre for this land and later sold it for $15 an acre, thinking they had made a killing. And that land was very close to the center of what is now Detroit, and which in the 60s and 70s, when she would have remembered it, would have been some of the most expensive real estate on earth, as that was the heart of the car industry back then. She did remember him being a meat inspector somewhere in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, somewhere. She wasn't absolutely sure. But she does remember that he died at home when she was a teenager, and that according to her memory, they did an autopsy of her father on the kitchen table, and she walked in on it as the doctor who was doing the autopsy took out his kidney and held it up, and she described it as looking like a piece of Swiss cheese.
Kidney or liver?
I'm not sure whether it was his kidney or his liver. She said Bright's disease, which I'm not sure whether it's the kidney disease or the liver disease, but she knew that it had holes in it like Swiss cheese and that it killed him as a relatively young man. And her mother was left a widow, of course, with grandmother as a teenager and her brother Grover some years younger. She remembered that her mother had ended up owning a boarding house in Oklahoma City, and that boarding house was where she met my grandfather, Roscoe Conklin Linderman, as he was riding through on his way west.
On a horse?
On a horse, a beautiful stud horse, which was all that he claimed of his father's estate from Blandville, Kentucky, the town where I, by the way, was born. And he saw this beautiful red-headed, green-eyed, fair-skinned girl sitting on the front for a place to stay, and he thought, well, that would be a good place to stop. At the time she was 16, he was 26. A few months later, they were married and were the parents of my father, Burnham Sterling Linderman, who was born in 1908. Now, where else do you want me to go with this story? My father remembered being a very small child, living in the boarding house with his grandmother and his mother. And there were lots of older men who lived there as their permanent home. And since he was a beautiful little boy, he had blonde curls, and he looked like an angel. And they say he was something of a naughty boy, which, knowing my father, we can certainly remember. But all the old men spoiled him and were always giving him pennies and nickels and even up to a quarter, which was a great deal of money in those days. And so he was very much spoiled. Grandmother was a very young and beautiful widow, and I think she left much of his discipline to his grandmother. And grandmothers are notorious for not being very good disciplinarians for their charming, beautiful, and only grandchild.
And so this grandmother was Louisa Sanders, who
Yes.
later became Long.
Yes.
This is Liona's mother.
This is Liona's mother, who owned this boarding house. And the only story she ever told me about her mother, other than her mother spoiling a little Bernie so badly, was the story of Louisa catching Rob Luke treating Bernie very badly. He whipped him with a horsewhip and stuck his face in the stuff in an old-fashioned outhouse, and Louisa got a butcher knife and chased him and had every intentions of killing him. It was because of that that Bernie was shipped off to Ballard County, Blandville, to his other grandmother to raise,
Whose name was?
whose name was Ellen Bolin Linderman, ultimately Pease.
And so Bernie remembers being in the boarding house at about...
At 3 and 4, maybe 5.
Because Bernie was born...
Bernie was born in 1908, and his father died in 1914. But we suspect his mother had remarried because his half-brother Leslie was born in 1914, and his father didn't die until August of that year. I don't know Leslie's exact birthday, but I do know it was 1914. Leslie only lived to be about 2 years old. And looking at pictures of Leslie, obviously there was something wrong with that child from birth on, because he did not look like a normal child. He didn't exactly look like Down syndrome, but he looked very different. After that, Liona gave birth to Grace Louise Luke and Robert Grover Luke, and she abandoned them when they were very young, disappeared, and then married a man by the name of Tracy and gave birth to 2 little boys, Jack and Billy, and I don't remember which was which. We finally found the descendants of Jack and Billy Tracy, who are my half-uncles, or who were. They are now dead.